Welcome to Joy in the Breakthrough, a podcast where we'll be talking to a wide range of leaders from different generations and backgrounds, leaders who have found power in being broken open. I'm Connie Lindsay.
And I'm Anna Valencia. We are your hosts, and we believe that our challenges can lead to breakthroughs, and we want to share those insights with you.
We hope these stories will inspire you to explore the I'm possible in you.
Thank you so much, Joy in the Breakthrough listeners, for our next episode. We're excited about season 2 kicking off, and we have a very special guest, one of our first guests of the season. Connie and Dr. Jean have been well acquainted and friends, and I'm so excited to see what we're going to learn about you, Dr. Jean, today.
Well, it is so great to be here with you, and I'm so excited to talk with both of you.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to take a couple seconds to introduce Dr. Jean and let people know about your amazing background. As Anna said, I've had the privilege of knowing you, and I'm calling you my sister friend for a long time.
And I received that.
For sure. So Dr. Jean Porter King is an author, consultant, pastor, and leadership coach specializing in women's leadership. A trusted teacher and guide who has taught leadership at both the undergrad and seminary levels and through corporate development programs. Dr. Jean is the founder and president of the Transporter Group, Inc., a consulting company based in Greater Chicago. She is passionate about developing existing and emerging leaders. Her goal is to encourage and empower more women to lead well.
Yes.
Welcome, Dr. Jean.
It is so good to be here. Thank you.
We're happy you took some time on your busy schedule. I think we're all going to be able to call you sister friends, hopefully, after this.
Yes.
Because this podcast was really born out of hearing people's stories. And when you hear people's stories and learn how they've gone through breakthroughs to breakthrough to joy and to lead authentically to themselves, especially as women of color, I know that that's really what our listeners gain from is insights and tips and strategies. So I know we're going to get to all that. But first, I have to ask you how you became this confident woman in leading well. So, Dr. Jean, who are you, and how have you, come to define yourself? Tell us about that process.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that question. I define myself as a child of God who is called, equipped, and empowered to lead and serve in ministry and in the marketplace. I've always had these dual roles, and recognize that was part of my vocation when you look at vocation broadly as a calling. And when you ask about how did I come to this sense, it was a journey. Where I grew up, a lot of identity could be imposed upon me and others. And very early on, I did what I was asked to do, went into engineering because I was good at math, gravitated into the corporate organizational development consulting. That was like, eureka, I found this place, right? And loved it. And at a very young age, ended up, in very significant roles in corporate America, corporate staff, and at one point reporting directly to a president of a division. So I was just doing it from the outside. And at the same time, staying very active in ministry at my local church, as well as our statewide organization, and again, in leadership in that. And at some point, from the outside, it was very significant and people could see the success, but I was beginning to feel something inside. And I remember, do you remember the song by Ron Winans and Friends, Abundant Life?
Yes.
That song
Tell us a lyric so that people can be grounded in.
The song, the refrain continues to go to me. He gave me abundant life. He gave me abundant life. I trade in my sorrows, and he gave me abundant life. And it's based on the promise of Jesus that said, I came that you might have life, and that more abundantly. And I traveled, to this day, I've always traveled as a consultant. I traveled for a living. I'd go into significant cities, come back, go straight to church. And one day I was at home listening to that. And on the floor of my apartment, I remember saying, Lord, I'm not experiencing the abundant life. From the outside, I was experiencing a prosperous, significant life, especially as a late 20s, early 30-year-old.
I was just going to ask you how old you were when you had this
epiphany.
epiphany.
We're talking late 20s, early 30s. And I said, wow, I'm not experiencing that abundant life. And part of it was I wasn't experiencing the joy. And I know you talk a lot about joy versus happiness. And so the rumblings began to happen. I continued on. And at this point, I'd gotten a major promotion in my professional role, and that's where I reported to a division president, and I was leading all of the organizational development activities for our division. And you all know it as Mead School and Office Supply. So, we have our notebooks.
Oh, yes.
So long story short, one day I found myself in my office. I had traveled in from somewhere. I was in town for a day or so, and I started crying in my office. And just broke down, just weeping, couldn't stop. And I called my aunt, who's a minister. And the aunties and mothers in our tradition, she prayed with me, we talked about it, and I pulled it together to get through the workday, but I took a week or whatever amount of time off. And I ended up going to my brother's house. He was in Downingtown, Pennsylvania at the time. And he and his family just kind of, loved on me. But I literally had one of those times that I just had to, what's going on? And let's figure this out. And it was shortly after that I felt that it was time for me, and had always wanted to go and do my doctorate. And it was time for me to leave the corporate space and go do this doctorate. But the breakthrough was that I needed to live my life the way I really was beginning to feel called. I had like two paths I was on, the corporate path and the church path. And the corporation actually wanted me to stay and said, well, we'll pay for you to get a doctorate, but it would have been in business. And I went out there, I got it in communication and culture. I wanted to know more about leadership. And what began to evolve out of this breakthrough was what Parker Palmer called this hidden wholeness.
Yes.
I had, and I didn't know that language at the time. We learned it once I got to seminary. I felt that I needed to be more integrated. I was living two selves, two lives.
That divided
and I wasn't,
life.
That divided life is what he calls it.
He calls it a divided life. Yeah.
And I wasn't hypocritical. People at the work knew I was a woman of faith, and I was, highly professional, and same with church. But it was a divided life, and that breakthrough for me said, "Now I'm one person who serves in multiple arenas." And that was a major empowering season for me.
And what you've talked about, you've described, we talk about intersectionality.
Yeah.
That a woman of faith, a business person, all of those things. As you're going through that, when we interview and talk to people, and thank you for sharing that amazing breakthrough, in the points in your life where you knew you wanted to make those changes, and we'll get some tips and techniques at the end, but I often say to people, what is that knowing? Because we all want to be really, mystical and say there's an inner knowing. I'm not the person who gets the inner knowing. I kind of need like a neon sign. So what was that like for you?
I find that hard to believe, Connie.
Well, and there are the inner feelings and so on, but I found as I've coached and mentored people and supported them, is there one thing that you can say, here is what it is? And I think the crying, because that's a physical manifestation of enough. Can you just drop one nugget on us?
Yeah, I think your point is that I obviously was not the one who got it inside either. It took a breakdown in my office, and and I had to cry quietly because the walls were thin.
Exactly.
So I obviously didn't have it, but it helped me develop it.
Yes.
So there were seasons now, and as people read my story, even in my book, I've navigated in and out of places, and there became more of a knowing. But part of that knowing was I never wanted to be at that broken place again, that it would take that for me to make a move to walk into my authentic identity.
Hi, I'm Roderick Hawkins, guest hosting for Darius Hillman. Joining me on the next edition of In the Arena, Brave Space Alliance CEO Shannon Lynn Parker.
My mother once said, now that you have your own voice, it's for you to tell the world what your name is.
Tuesday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org and the CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
Well, I love that you said the rumbling. You felt the rumblings, because oftentimes I think as women, especially women of color, we get these like corporate roles or big leadership roles, and we think it's, for me at least speaking, I think oh, it's such a great opportunity. I'm too afraid to walk away from
Right.
the money or the
Right.
power or the prestige. So you ignore the rumblings.
Exactly.
And you just think, okay, I'm just going to shove that to the side until they outpour out of you to actually make a shift.
Right. And we, as women of color, that's exactly why we stay. And we also feel that we carry the weight of other women of color
Just going to say
upon
that.
our shoulders.
We do, because you become the first
The
or
first.
whatever, and
And
or
your
the
families,
or the
too.
only,
Definitely in our families.
Exactly, and the
You don't
only.
want to disappoint them and all the sacrifices your parents might have made or your siblings might have made for you to be here.
Right.
And it's almost too, for me, it's like, am I being ungrateful because, or am I being selfish for maybe feeling a certain way of this doesn't feel right, or I'm not in alignment with my purpose or my why, which we talked about the last episode. And so to our viewers, how do you overcome that? How do we overcome that kind of feelings that we might get, or try to ignore the rumblings?
Yeah, I think what I learned and what I now coach women on is what, we've been talking about this notion of a holistic leadership. Because I do leadership development, there are all kinds of models and theories out there, from situational leadership, transformational leadership, you name it. But one thing that I think speaks to us as women of color is really helping people recognize a holistic approach to leadership. We are not one thing. We are integrated, need to be whole. And so too often the leadership models that are out there that have been developed by primarily white men, and I study this in my doctoral work.
yes.
And
So the research there is to back it up.
there's research there to back it up.
Exactly.
And the reality is we take on the competencies. Sometimes we've even taken on the styles and approaches, and we ignore that we're whole beings. And part of the beauty of what we bring to the table is we're body, soul, and spirit. Our emotions inform who we are and what we do. And I tell people they want to make women's emotions pejorative.
Right.
Men have emotions, and when I first cut my teeth in the very first job out of college, I was the like a project manager for a major program we were implementing. I was a logistics engineer, and I was working with all the internal clients. They were all white men. Here I am, this 24, 25-year-old black woman, and they get in these meetings and they would just yell over each other. We need this in this system, and our client system needs that. And I sat there at first like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. And then something just came up out of me because I was raised by a father that my first job was in a manufacturing plant, that we had to yell over the machinery all the time. So I yelled, wait a minute, stop, got their attention. But my point of that is, it's not as popular to have that kind of emotional display now in corporate America. So I get that. But even then, their emotions were not deemed pejorative.
For sure.
Ours would have
Yes.
been and still are.
Or the
We would
label
be
of the
hysterical.
angry black woman,
There you go.
or the
Yes.
hot-headed Latina woman,
Yes.
all of those tropes that come with that,
Exactly.
and how we had to navigate and learn to navigate through that as well. I totally agree with you.
Yes.
And it's even now the research, and you do a lot of research, it's this whole notion of soft skills.
Yes.
I say there's no such thing as a soft skill, and that's what you're talking about. Being able
Yes.
to listen
Yes.
and to care about the people that we lead
Yes.
is critically important. Retention of highly skilled workers or any partner or person on a team, it's how they're treated.
they're
A
treated.
friend of mine used to say, love goes where it's invited, but stays where it's treated best.
Yes.
Right.
And that's also part of holistic leadership.
Yes.
So it's us as whole beings, body, soul, and spirit, what we bring to the table. But it's also the environment and the system we work in, that there's a wholeness to that. And
That's
how
why I
I
want
res-
to. Oh, go ahead.
and
Go,
how
Jackie.
I respect and love and care on people. We used to not even use that word.
Of course not. Of course not.
Care.
Or love.
Or love.
Or love.
Right.
Well, I was
Yes.
going to ask you, can you break down the traits of a holistic leader? So, because I want to take notes, but I'm going to have to watch this pod again. Can you tell us, what makes a holistic leader?
And I'm still working on the model.
Okay.
So as you Google it, there's not a lot out there. And so I'm developing a program now.
Okay. So stay tuned for your next book.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned for the next book. But if we even go with this book, it's a number one recognition of who you are and that authentic self. It's recognizing that we're a complex being, body, soul, and spirit. You notice I've said that quite a bit. And that as a leader, I'm inclined and give myself permission to care for the whole self. So I show up authentically, but I care for the whole self. But it's also advocating for wellness at work. And then that says I look at other humans in a way that I want them. That when I can lead well and from a place of wholeness, then I encourage others to do so also. So it's about identity, knowing who I am. It's about being able to pay attention to the emotions, and the discernment is what our traditions may have even called it. Being able to pay attention to that Dr. I'm not going to remember her name right now. It'll come back to me. She talks about women of color, especially being able to know and sense around us. It's not just book knowledge, it's our experiences. You bring all that to the table and you tap into it, in addition to the competencies that we develop as leaders.
And I think as we have more women in leadership, we can see ourselves in each other.
Yes.
And we are then most comfortable having those conversations.
Yes.
It isn't that we're sitting around talking about, how much we love and that we don't terminate people who are not performing well,
Yes.
or that we
Yes.
don't have good corrective discussions.
Yes.
But our intention is never to destroy anyone.
Never to destroy.
Our intention when we lead authentically is to affirm what is in each person and help develop that. Now, I've had to help people find their destiny elsewhere during my career as a leader, which is how I like to refer to it. But it's never done with trying to destroy the person.
I'm going to use that one,
That's
Connie.
right.
Find their new destiny.
And find your destiny elsewhere, it just might not be here.
Yes.
But that is, and I want to pivot to this book, your latest book. It's called Leading Well. And we talk about the book, but this is your 7th book.
This is my seventh book.
You've written 6 others.
Yes.
But this book in particular really grabbed my heart. And if you could please tell us first how this was born, the book Leading Well, and as you've written it, what really comes out of that, and what can we learn from leading well as a movement?
As a movement, I feel like this one is my baby. I have always written in the area of women's leadership from a spiritual standpoint or from a corporate standpoint. So I have both the biblical books out and then the business books. But this one came about when 2 of my dear friends died at what I would call premature ages from rare cancers, and it shook me. They didn't linger. It shook me. And for my church, I began to develop a program called The Well Woman. And it was the idea of how do we, our physical health, our relational health, our financial health, how do we attend to all that? And we had a year-long program. And it was based on the woman at the well. And the premise is that if we can truly lead from the well of the Spirit, the living water of the Spirit, then that wisdom, that discernment informs these other areas. And so we did that for a year. But something kept coming to me like there's more to the story. Often this woman at the well has been castigated and stereotyped, and I began to see the leadership dimensions of it. And that's where this book came out. So not only is there a leadership dimension, not only is it a call story about this woman, but it gives us insights in how we can implement holistic leadership and lead well, because the lessons are right there in the text.
And this book is for any leader. Whether you're a person of faith or not,
Yes.
what is in the book and talking about
Yes.
leading well and holistic leadership, which is really what we're talking about, there is something in this for everyone. There's a story that you tell in the book, I think in one of your career moments as you were transitioning, but you were consulting with this firm. We often talk about microaggressions and those sorts of things. You're going to love this story, Anna, about the one story. I want you to share that with our listeners.
I was with a big 5 consulting practice, and they sent me and a colleague down to this area to do some training. It was in Texas, and they were a little conservative, and they weren't accustomed to kind of a brown-skinned woman, right? And in our diversity and awareness, it's where we added equity to it. It was really helping people. The goal was give frameworks, help people understand the business model around inclusion, and then see themselves. Where can I change? And so I pushed, and I guess I pushed too hard for this person. It was an older white man. man. And he said, and what I heard is an old boy accent, I was trying not to stereotype, but he said, you know what? You're trying to make us all sound like we're a bunch of racists down here. I want you to know that I had a mammy who I love dearly to this day. Aunt Anna, Connie. I don't even know what I said after that. Yeah. But I remember it being so starkly, if you know the history of the mammy figure, and for him not to know that, we were in direct tension around what this mammy meant. And we got through the training, my colleague and I, but it was about a week later I got a call from the lead client person. And she opened up nicely, and I'm sure she was doing some coaching, but she wanted to give me feedback on how the client. And we had a conversation, and I told her, I gave her my perspective of what happened and how I felt about the mammy figure. And I'm sure she said, but can you imagine how he felt? And can you imagine this? I'm sure. But what I write about in the book, it was at that moment that I recognized my values were not in alignment with hers and this project. And at some point, I ended up shifting and moving into a different arena because you have to have value alignment, or what Parker Palmer talks about is our soul and our role being aligned. And that was not going to work for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we don't get to honor my own diversity. So that wasn't going to work.
Oh, I love how you wrote that, because I think that that's something that even, my generation and younger generations struggle with, is how do we know if we are in alignment? How do we know if that's the right move? We could talk all day.
I know.
But we've got to turn it over. Before we go, we'd love to talk about our tips and techniques section. We'd love to hear, just drop us with one great gem that we could talk and take away with to our
And if
listeners.
you can add how you define joy in there, that would be.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
What's going on, Chicago? I'm Darius Caffey, and I invite you to join me for a new episode of The Table on Air with our very special guest, diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, Donald Gilliam.
It doesn't just take one person. I said that everybody can win. That's the whole purpose of what we want to do.
Join the conversation with us on Tuesday, October 3rd at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV Cable, Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org, and available on the CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power in community television.
So first of all, and when your listeners get the book, that very first tip that I say is you get the opportunity when you come to recognize maybe my values aren't aligned, or I'm feeling something, or I need to make a move, it's time for a change. And I give 4 or 5 ways that you can recognize that you might need a change. And so, we'll let them read that. But the first tip is you get the opportunity to reimagine your leadership. Do some visioning. What could my life be like if I truly led from the well, or if my values were aligned with this place? What could it be? And if I didn't feel the pressure to live up to other people's expectations of what a woman of color is supposed to be. I could truly lead from that place. So that's the first tip, is take some time for yourself to explore what is and is not working. Where am I? Yes. And so often we're so busy doing the work, we don't take time for ourselves. Right. And my first tip, I've been a career consultant. And one time I heard the Spirit say, you've got to start treating yourself like one of your clients. And I started booking time on my calendar for my own development, for developing new processes and programs as I was moving from just consulting into consulting and coaching. And had I not done that, the client is queen and king in my field. Right. And I had to begin to treat myself like a queen.
I love that.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to wrap up our here with Connie at Say Less. Connie always gives us one great also gem, that word that we need to hear today.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Jean, for being with us. It's just a privilege. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. And living well and being well. And we want everybody to become a part of our Leading Well movement. But as we're talking about leadership today, I thought about the following, that good leaders create ecosystems, not egosystems. An ecosystem is an intricate, intertwined system of being and can be a living thing. So these ecosystems, we nurture people as leaders, that ecosystem. An ecosystem, and there's an acronym that says that's edging God out. But ego, at any rate, we don't want to be leaders that lead with ego, but we want to be an ecosystem, consistently nourishing the growth of others and allowing and encouraging them to lead and live well.
That is
Amen.
a wrap for us. Thank you, Dr. Jean, for joining us. Thank you for being here at Join the Breakthrough. We'll see you on our next episodes in season 2. Bye.